October 14th, 1987. Grand Junction, Colorado. A dusty metal locker at the long-abandoned Union Station was forced open during renovation. Inside an envelope dated June 4th, 1976. Faded ink spelled only a name. Eleanor Briggs. As Detective Harris unfolded the yellowed letter, he couldn't have known it would reopen a case buried by secrets, guilt, and time itself. October 14th, 1987. Grand Junction, Colorado. Detective Mark Harris stood in the echoing ruins of the old Union Station, the air thick with dust and memory. Sunlight filtered through broken skylights, catching on drifting motes and the flaked paint of forgotten ticket windows. Somewhere, in an office radio abandoned decades earlier, a faint hum still clung to the past like a ghost refusing to go quiet. Renovation crews had uncovered the lockers only that morning. Rows of them lined the concrete wall like steel tombstones, their numbers faded by time. Nobody had touched them since the station shut down in 1979. But Locker 128 refused to open until they forced it with a screwdriver and a rubber mallet. Inside lay what no one expected. An envelope, browned at the edges, sealed with old-fashioned wax, its corners curled with age. On the front, written in faded blue ink, were the words, asterisk, Eleanor Briggs, to be opened if I am gone. Asterisk, asterisk, beneath that line. In smaller writing, June 4th, 1976. Harris held it delicately, feeling the weight of 11 years compressed between two thin sheets of paper. Something in that date tickled his memory. 1976. The bicentennial. Fireworks, flags, and a summer that felt endless. His own hair had been thick and dark then. He'd just joined the force bright-eyed, inexperienced, and running on coffee and idealism. The site foreman called out, "Detective, we got others, probably rented by travelers. Want them cataloged?" "Catalog everything," Harris murmured, sliding the envelope into a case folder. "But this one stays with me." He walked outside, needing air. Grand Junction stretched before him under a pale October sun. Across the street stood Ruby's Diner, once a busy stopover for passengers, grabbing coffee before boarding the evening train to Denver. Now, only its neon sign remained, flickering faintly. Good pies since '53. The scent of old grease. The hum of that endless station radio loop in his memory. It all came rushing back. In his office later that night. Harris carefully slit the envelope open with his pocket knife. Inside were 2 folded pages of stationery decorated with tiny blue forget-me-nots. The handwriting slanted slightly to the left, confident, yet hurried. Greater than, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't fix what I started. I never meant for any of this to happen. Eleanor doesn't know what I've done, and I pray she never will. But if I'm gone, tell her, look by the lake. You'll understand then. No signature, only the initials, TR. He sat back, heart tightening. He knew those initials. Thomas Renshaw, once a name whispered through his department 2 decades earlier. Renshaw had been questioned in '76 about the disappearance of his fiancée, Eleanor Briggs. No evidence, no charges, case cold. The file, buried with others, had collected the same dust as this letter. Harris looked again at the faded date asterisk. June 4th, 1976 asterisk, and felt the symphony of the past pressing against the present. He could still remember the city that summer. Men in flared pants and sideburns. Women with feathered hair waving paper flags from convertibles painted in patriotic red, white, and blue. Kids running barefoot through sprinklers. The bicentennial banners on Main Street that promised a new tomorrow. But while the town had celebrated freedom, maybe two someone's had been caught in a quiet prison of their own making. Mark rubbed his temples, glanced at the letter again, and swiveled toward the filing cabinet that hadn't been touched in months. The Renshaw case file might still be somewhere inside, sandwiched between old robbery reports and liquor violations from the '70s. He found it, dust-covered, marked status, unresolved. As he skimmed the yellowed pages, He was struck by how thin life records could be. 5 sheets of paper, that's all that remained in one. A young woman's existence in the eyes of law and memory. He read the closing line of the detective. Summary from 1976. Asterisk. No further leads. Possibly voluntary disappearance. Asterisk voluntary, he thought. Hardly ever was. Outside, wind howled across the deserted tracks. The sound brought back the distant echo of a train whistle, the kind that used to wake him in the middle of the night. Reminding him of places he'd never go, people he'd never meet, he looked again at Eleanor's name on the envelope. If someone had sealed this message to be found only when they were gone, it meant guilt was involved, and guilt was the most patient companion imaginable. Mark. Harris slipped the letter into a clear evidence bag, labeled it carefully, and wrote just below the date line, asterisk, possible connection to case file, number 76 to 211. Eleanor Briggs, asterisk. He turned off his desk lamp, but the glow from the file drawer remained in his mind, like a beacon calling him back toward something unfinished. As he locked up the station evidence room, he whispered to himself, "You don't bury the truth, Thomas. Not forever." Yet he knew that reopening this would stir ghosts better left alone. Still, for men like Harris, men who had spent their lives chasing justice, the past was irresistible. It waited quietly, like that old envelope, for someone brave or foolish enough to pry it open. Nostalgic pulse. He paused by the window, watching headlights trace the hum of Main Street, remembering greasy fries at Ruby's, Glenn Campbell songs on a crackling AM station, and the slow ache of youth when the world seemed simple enough to fix. He sighed. The years had taken his hair, patience, and many illusions. But not this one. That truth, once found, might still set some part of him free. The following morning dawned pale and dry. The kind of Colorado autumn day that smelled faintly of fallen apples and old wood. Detective Harris arrived at the precinct before sunrise. The only sound the buzz of the fluorescent lights warming up above him. He placed the 1976 letter beside the cold case file on his desk. The envelope's edges had curled more overnight, paper fibers rising as if the past itself resisted confinement. He called records. "This is Harris. Pull me microfilm archive from June 76 through January 77. Missing person. Name Eleanor Briggs, Grand Junction region." Within an hour, reels and reels of blurred copies filled his desk. As he spun the handle, the headlines jumped by like ghosts in rapid succession. Asterisk. Bicentennial parade draws thousands. Heat wave continues. Local woman missing fiancé. Question. Asterisk. He slowed the reel and pressed the magnifier against Eleanor's photograph, her smile open. Eyes the soft, uncertain brown of someone on the brink of adulthood. He jotted in his notebook. Seen last at Ruby's Diner. 9:15 p.m., June 4th. Witness, Marjorie Dent. Owner, Ruby's. The name was suddenly much more than a memory. Harris drove out mid-morning, his old Dodge squeaking protest at every turn. Ruby's Diner still stood at the corner, though winter gray creepers had climbed half its sign. Inside, the place smelled exactly as it had in 76 coffee, bacon grease, and history. The hum of a jukebox still worked faintly in the corner, somehow playing an Elvis tune through scratchy speakers. Behind the counter, a woman in her late 70s turned and squinted. "Mark Harris, I'll be damned. Haven't seen you in, 20 years? 21, he said, with a tired grin. "Morning, Marjorie." She poured coffee, thick and black. "You still chasing ghosts?" He placed the evidence bag on the counter, the letters faint writing just visible through plastic. Maybe this one won't stay quiet. Marjorie's hand froze mid-air. She leaned closer, eyes widening. "Eleanor Briggs," she read softly. "I thought nobody remembered that girl anymore." "I'm trying to..." Marjorie exhaled. That summer was something, wasn't it? Whole town done up for the bicentennial. Boys in their dad's uniforms, girls in red, white, and blue skirts. Everyone thinking history was behind us. Not right under our noses. Harris nodded. "You saw her that night." "I did." Eleanor came in alone, first ordered lemon pie. Didn't eat a bite. Said she was waiting for Tommy. When he showed up, she looked scared. Not angry, just scared. He kept his voice low, but she was trembling. What about after they left? They went out into the lot. Rain started up not long after. Neon kept flickering out there. I can still see him standing by the old Pontiac of his. I turned to put a pie in the case, looked back out, and they were gone. You didn't hear an argument? Only thunder, and maybe her crying. But next morning, I heard she was missing. Harris stared at his cooling coffee, the bitter scent folding into 100 others from the same diner decades earlier. He could almost hear the laughter of young couples, the trill of coins dropping into the jukebox, the steady promise of small-town nights that felt eternal. Tommy came by a day later. Marjorie continued. Sat right there, booth by the window. Asked if anyone found her purse. Wouldn't touch his eggs. Just kept stirring his coffee. Said he was going fishing up by Ruxton Lake to clear his head. That was the last I saw of him. Harris scribbled the note. You ever think he did it? Marjorie shrugged, eyes glistening. I think sometimes people do bad things without meaning to. And the ones who see it, they keep quiet, thinking silence is kindness. Her words landed heavier than the coffee cup on the saucer. Silence as kindness. Maybe that was what this whole town had done in 1976. Harris stood, folding the letter carefully back into its sleeve. Thanks, Marjorie. She smiled sadly. I still think about her. Sweet girl. Used to hum along to the jukebox when no one was looking. Half the time she was picking Carpenter's songs, the slow ones. Broke my heart when she never came back to finish that pie. As Harris walked out to his truck, the sky shifted from gold to gray. He climbed in, turned on the radio, an old push-button model that hummed before finding a station. Static, then music, soft, familiar, weary. Something from long ago. The note Marjorie left behind echoed through his thoughts. Asterisk. Silence can feel like kindness. Asterisk, he wasn't sure yet who had chosen that silence. Thomas, Eleanor's father, or the whole city. But it was obvious one or two wrong words from the past had created ripples that still reached this far ahead. He turned the key and drove toward Ruxton Lake, that quiet spot that had once been a lover's hideaway. Later, the core of a mystery dot as the road stretched ahead. He glanced at the rear-view mirror, at the reflection of faint wrinkles in tired eyes, and thought how strange it was that the past always managed to find its way home dot in a glove box. The letter rested beside an old bicentennial keychain from his rookie days, 2 reminders of roads once traveled, of choices that never unmade themselves, and somewhere deep down, Harris felt the first stir of something he hadn't allowed himself in years, hope that this time, truth might actually win. Ruxton Lake lay still beneath the early afternoon sun, its ripples shimmering like cold glass. The place hadn't changed much since the bicentennial summer of 76 pine trees stooped under decades of wind. And the same warped dock stretched out like a stubborn memory dot detective. Mark Harris parked his Dodge by the shoreline, gravel crunching softly underfoot. The air smelled of pine sap and fading campfire smoke. Every so often, a bird cut the silence, sharp and fleeting, somewhere distant. The faint drone of a motorboat broke the illusion that time had stopped. The coordinates mentioned in the torn letter had led him here, to a narrow dirt road veering off Route 50, hidden by years of wild growth. There, behind the tangle of brush, stood a small cottage, its roof sagging. Paint bleached into gray bone dot, it was the kind of place young lovers once dreamed of fixing up after the wedding, the perfect little escape. With striped deck chairs and a transistor radio tuned to KEXO, the local station that had played Afternoon Delight endlessly back in 76. He remembered that summer clearly. Red, white, and blue bunting on mailboxes. 8-track tapes scattered across car seats. And the smell of cigarettes mixed with Aquanet drifting through dance nights. That now the cottage stood abandoned. A time capsule sealed in dust. He shouldered open the swollen door. It sighed inward with a reluctant moan. Inside, the air felt cool and undisturbed. A layer of dust softened the floorboards like ash. Faded curtains fluttered half-heartedly against the window panes. On a small table sat an 8-track player. Long silent, its slot still housing a tape labeled Bread. Baby, I'ma want you. Harris ran a gloved finger along its edge. The shelf above held chipped mugs, an old Polaroid camera, and a small stack of yellowing photographs, the kind with scalloped edges and handwritten dates on the back. He set a photo under the light that filtered through cracked glass. Eleanor Briggs and Thomas Renshaw, July 1975. They were standing near this very lake, arms around each other, broad grins under a cloudless sky. Eleanor's sundress caught a breeze. Her eyes, even frozen in time, gleamed with trust. Harris studied the way Renshaw's arm curved protectively around her. Yet his expression seemed unreadable, a tension in the jaw, a sharpness that the lens could never quite disguise. The cottage held intimacy, and unease in equal measures. Each room told a half-finished story. A calendar still pinned to July 1976. A wicker chair draped with a denim jacket. Newspapers with headlines of asterisk. Nation celebrates 200 years of freedom. In the small bedroom, the bed was neatly made, as if awaiting return. Beside the lamp lay a charm bracelet shaped like musical notes, tarnished but intact. When he crouched near a sagging floorboard, he noticed a faint groove, a patch dustier than the rest. Using his penknife, he pried it open carefully. Beneath the board rested a small tin box. Inside, a women's wristwatch stopped at 10:42, a few silver rings, an unmailed postcard showing Ruxton Lake Summer Glory Series, 1974, and a brass key stamped faintly on the back, 126, locker, 126, 2 numbers away from the one that held the 1976 letter. His pulse quickened. It meant the letter's author, presumably Thomas, had used more than one station locker. A contingency plan. Secrets packed in compartments, guarded by numbers and rust. Outside, waves lapped faintly against the dock. Harris carried the box out into the sunlight, sat on the cabin stoop, and studied the brass key until it caught fire in the afternoon glare. If Thomas had hidden material in locker 126, there might be more letters, perhaps even something Eleanor wrote before she vanished. From the porch, he saw the lake shimmer like a sheet of memory. Kids had once paddled here every summer. Transistor radios playing America's Sister Golden Hair. Sandwiches wrapped in foil. Now it was empty. The stillness punctuated only by ripples from a passing breeze. He imagined Eleanor walking along the dock, talking to Thomas perhaps about a secret, or perhaps about their future. Maybe she'd laugh nervously, unaware the moment would be carved forever in the town's conscience. The sun sank lower. Harris locked the tin box in the trunk of his Dodge, took a last glance at the weather-beaten cottage, and whispered into the cooling air. "What were you trying to protect, Eleanor?" It wasn't a question the lake could answer, but it seemed to hear him anyway. As he drove off, evening shadows stretched thin over the road. He turned on the radio, finding static and fragments of an old program replaying from cassette, that kind people made and then forgot about. He smiled faintly. Nostalgia always found a way in, even when you wished it wouldn't. Behind him, the lake grew darker, the cottage retreating into twilight, a keeper of one more unspoken truth, and somewhere beneath its waters, something old still waited to rise. The next morning, clouds rolled in heavy over Grand Junction. Harris poured coffee so strong it could melt paint, then spread his clues across the desk. The letter, the tin box, the brass key. Locker 126 at Union Station had remained sealed, records said, for over 40 years. He dialed facilities, and by afternoon, a pair of maintenance men met him inside the half-renovated depot. "Careful with it," Harris said as one pried open the next stiff latch. The door sprang loose with a hollow thunk. Inside lay nothing but an old manila envelope, brittle but intact. Written pencil, asterisk, asterisk. "Do not read until I am gone." Asterisk, asterisk. It was signed T. Renshaw. He slipped it gently open. Unlike the earlier note, this one was written in neat, deliberate sentences. A confession, perhaps, or something close to it, greater than There's no making right what pride and fear have already undone. When Eleanor learned the truth about the money, I thought she'd hate me. She didn't. She begged me to put it back. I was going to, then it all went wrong. The ink had bled from moisture, erasing part of a paragraph. What remained hinted at panic references to her father's name and asterisk, the boat by the North Inlet. Asterisk, it ended abruptly. Greater than I never wanted it to happen. Tell her father I was sorry. Harris leaned back. This was no simple disappearance. Money. The father. The boat. He searched public records for the Briggs family. Eleanor's father, asterisk George Briggs, had been vice president of the Mountain Trust Bank in 1976, one of the largest savings institutions in western Colorado. Bank theft. Cover-up. That missing money might have been the unnamed shame Eleanor discovered. At city records. Gray files and the whir of ceiling fans became his company. Leafing through microfilm copies, he paused on a death certificate dated August 2nd, 1977. Thomas Renshaw. Cause. Drowning accident, Ruxin Lake. Found near the northern dock, same place. Eleanor was last seen. The notation. No foul play suspected. No one had looked twice. But now, looking twice was all Harris could do. Late that evening, he tracked down Renshaw's sister, asterisk Paula Whitmore, now 68 and living in a modest home on the outskirts of town. She greeted him warily at the door, one hand gripping the collar of an elderly terrier. When they found his body, she said quietly once they sat, folks said it was an accident. But Tommy had been different after Eleanor went missing. He'd come by crying sometimes, saying he ruined everything. One night, real stormy, he said she knew about the money, that he'd borrowed some from the bank for a short while, her father's bank. Did he mention bringing it back? Harris asked. She nodded. Said she wanted him to go straight to the old man and confess. But he was scared it'd ruin her name, so he put it off. Harris could almost see it now. A proud young man drowning in mistakes, too big to own. Paula's eyes softened. He left me something, you know. Upstairs in the attic. Told me not to open it till ... Well, till someone asked the right questions again. The attic smelled of cedar, and the 1970s cardboard boxes marked Tommy's records. A cracked bowling trophy. Faded Polaroids of people who'd stopped smiling decades ago. From a corner box, Paula retrieved an aged portable asterisk Panasonic asterisk cassette recorder, the kind with tactile click buttons and a cloudy plastic lid. A paper tag taped to it read June 6, 1976. Never had the heart to play it, she said, back at the precinct that night. Harris threaded fresh batteries inside, bracing himself for nothing more than static. Instead, a man's trembling voice bled through the tiny speaker. This is Tom Renshaw. If anyone hears this, I've done something foolish. I wanted a better life for us to impress her father. I never meant to steal, just borrow. She found out, said we'd fix it together. We argued by the dock. The rain came hard. She slipped. I tried. The recording broke off into a shudder of sobs, wind screaming faintly in the background. Words tumbled after, indistinct, but then one phrase surfaced, wet and final. Tell her father I was sorry. Tell her I loved her. The tape clicked to an end, replay humming softly like a heartbeat dying out. Harris sat motionless. 40 years of rumor, guilt, and silence all condensed into less than 2 minutes of confession. He realized then neither of them had meant for it to happen. Fear of shame, fear of truth, both had drowned, literally and otherwise, under its weight. Outside, rain slipped down the window in crooked paths, reflecting the glow of the desk lamp. He turned off the recorder, every muscle heavy with quiet understanding. That's when he noticed the edge of the tape. Label had a second date faintly scratched below the first. Asterisk back dock. North Inlet look again. Asterisk Ruxin Lake wasn't finished speaking yet. He looked toward the darkness outside the precinct window. Thunder rumbling once more, almost as if 1976 had looped back to finish its sentence. The following dawn arrived without ceremony, gray clouds blotting out the Rockies. The kind of morning that settled into bones slower than caffeine could chase away. Detective Harris stood in the precinct parking lot, metal thermos steaming in the chill, staring at the label still clutched in his gloved hand. Asterisk, back dock. North Inlet look again. Asterisk, some instructions didn't age dot by 8 a.m. Paris was watching wetsuited divers slip silently beneath the pewter surface of Ruxton Lake. Sheriff's patrol cars idled nearby, radios crackling with routine. The town paper's photographer waited respectfully out of view. The old detective's persistence had become a local curiosity that autumn. He waited as the ripples spread and died. Somewhere out there, under 10 feet of dark water, lay the North Dock, half collapsed from time. Paris walked its length slowly, the boards creaking beneath his boots until he reached the sagging end. The lake barely reflected him, just a smudge of gray. Above deeper gray, Ben came shouting from one of the boats. A diver's arm rose, gripping something bright and corroded metal, catching sunlight through silt. By noon, onshore forensic techs had recovered the remains of a small aluminum rowboat. Its hull punctured and next to it, a bundle of waterlogged fabric clutched in skeletal fingers. A slender wrist bone still wore a rusted bracelet. The initials engraved on a charm, E.B. Eleanor. Briggs had finally come home as the technicians worked under the careful hush of science and reverence. Harris stepped back, hands trembling slightly despite the cold. He'd seen countless recoveries of lost people, but this one reached somewhere private. Older than procedure, he remembered being 26 that bicentennial summer running foot patrols while Chicago blared from backyard speakers, watching fireflies swirl over drive-ins. Sharing cherry coke beneath the stars with a girl whose face he couldn't even summon clearly anymore. Youth had seemed indestructible. Now it just felt fragile, something you only knew you'd lost when you found its ruin. Inside his car, the Panasonic cassette waited on the passenger seat. He replayed the recording once more, this time listening through headphones, isolating faint background sounds between Thomas's ragged breaths. Behind the crying, he heard it, a woman's voice soft. Startled, Tom. The rope, then water crashing. A splash, struggling silence. Eleanor had indeed fallen accidentally. Thomas's guilt was painfully, entirely real. The theft that started everything had ruined them both. When Harris pulled the tape from the machine, moisture gathered in the corners of his weary eyes. He thought of Eleanor's father, long dead now. A secret like this had floated over his family's grave for 4 decades. He needed to write a report that meant more than bureaucratic closure. So he did what he always did when his hands needed steadiness. He stopped at Ruby's Diner. Marjorie still kept the same table by the window, though her hair was more silver now and her movements careful. Well, she asked softly, pouring his coffee before he asked. They found her, he said. Marjorie closed her eyes briefly. Lord, she slipped. He tried to help her. The jukebox hummed uncertainly, clicking into life. This time, it played the Asterisk Carpenters' Yesterday once more. The melody filled the space like an old photograph come to life, beautiful and fragile. I remember her singing that one, Marjorie murmured. I'd tell her she had a voice better than the record. Harris nodded, letting the song roll through him. Around them, sunlight glowed amber against chrome, casting tiny reflections off coffee pots and pie glass. It was 1987, but for a moment it might have been 1976. Again, looping reel where everything young and hopeful still breathed. When he finished his coffee, he slid a file envelope across the counter. Officially closing the case this afternoon. But I'd like you to hold on to this Eleanor's bracelet. Don't think evidence storage is the right place for it. Marjorie accepted it reverently. I'll make sure people remember her kindly. Yeah, he said, voice cracking just enough. That's all that ever matters. Outside, he climbed into his truck and sat motionless before starting the engine. The hum of the tape recorder reeled in his ears. He'd chased crimes, crooks, and ghosts across 3 decades, but the ones that stayed were always about small mistakes, magnified by silence. Thomas had drowned trying to hide his shame. Eleanor had died trying to forgive him. Whole lives collapsed in seconds because truth hesitated. Harris turned the key. The truck rumbled awake with the familiar rattle of age. He didn't drive back to the station right away. Instead, He went home to his quiet porch where the radio always caught a Denver oldies station past sunset. As evening deepened, the DJ's voice broke through static. Asterisk. In memory of those we've loved and lost, here's one from 76. Asterisk. A slow tune floated out muted. Aching. Beautiful. Harris leaned back in his chair, coffee cooling beside him, and let it play. Finally, he opened his notebook and wrote the line he'd been chasing since the first day he found that letter. Asterisk. Some mistakes don't need punishment. They punish themselves. Asterisk. He set down his pen, looking at the fading light curling through the old maple tree. The case was solved. But like most truths, it hadn't made the past any lighter. Still, in the quiet hum of the radio and the rustle of autumn leaves, there was something close to peace. Not justice, exactly, just human understanding. The kind that takes 40 years to bloom. News travels fast, even in towns grown old on routine. Within a week, the papers carried Eleanor Briggs's rediscovery. Front page under the modest headline. Asterisk. Missing woman of 1976 identified. Asterisk. It brought people out of memory's woodwork. Retired bank clerks, old classmates, long-widowed neighbors. They spoke softly, as if resurrecting her name might disturb the calm she'd finally found. Harris gave only one interview. Standing by the lake, wind shuffling through pine tops, he said simply, "We don't always get to choose which truths surface. But when they do, they deserve to be known." Behind him, the water glistened quietly light, rippling where divers had worked days earlier. Authorities would name the area Briggs Point after the family's request. That evening, Harris drove home through orange dusk, the radio murmuring Asterisk Simon and Garfunkel's Homeward Bound. His hand tapped the steering wheel, perfectly in rhythm, the same way he had done in 76 without thinking. He came to a stop before the defunct station, now fenced for the county's museum project. Locker doors hung open like silent mouths, revealing nothing more exotic than dust. But in 128, he noticed a fresh tag fluttering in the draft. It was his own handwriting on the case file. Summary. Beneath it, he tucked a photocopy of the letter and the final note from the recorder transcript. Maybe someday. He figured someone else would find it. History was cyclical that way. Before leaving, he paused under the platform's rusted clock tower. His reflection stretched long over the cold rails. He imagined trains departing again, people in flared jeans waving goodbye, paper cups of coffee steaming in their hands, laughter and life continuing unaware of the stories left behind. As twilight deepened, he whispered something he hadn't said aloud in years. "Thank you for telling me, Eleanor." Whether anyone or anything heard didn't matter. When he returned home, he stopped at a red light near Maple Avenue. In the reflection of the windshield, he caught the faint outline of his own weathered face and thought of all the silences he kept in his life white lies. Small postponements, the kind that could quietly grow into regrets if unattended. Eleanor and Thomas had been far too young to understand what silence costs. But Harris, past 60 now, understood all too well. He pulled into his driveway, the porch light flickering to greet him, and sat for a while in the truck, not ready to step back into stillness. The cassette deck on the passenger seat had rewound itself to the beginning, waiting. He'd press play just once more and listen. Through the soft crackle. Past Thomas's confessions and storm noise, he caught something faint he hadn't before, the murmur of another male voice holder, distant. It said only 3 words. Asterisk. Let it rest. Asterisk. Maybe a passerby that night. Maybe imagination. But Harris smiled anyway. At last, the river, metaphorical and literal, had carried its secrets home when he finally closed his notebook at night. Finishing the final report, he wrote an inscription above the heading that reflected everything he'd learned. Everything the town needed to remember. Greater than asterisk, asterisk. Truth waits. Lies age. Only honesty gives peace to the living and the dead. Asterisk, asterisk. He placed the report beside his badge, switched off the lamp, and let the soft sound of the old house settle around him. Somewhere, in that quiet space between the creak of floorboards and the hum of the refrigerator, he imagined Eleanor and Thomas finally forgiven. Two young souls caught in a storm who'd simply run out of time to tell the truth. Outside, a breeze rustled the maple leaves like turning pages, closing one story, opening countless others. And as the night stretched over Grand Junction, Detective Mark Harris leaned back, eyes half closed, and let the hum of the 1980s fade into the same comforting silence that always follows peace. October 28th, 1987. The kind of afternoon when light softened everything it touched. Detective Mark Harris parked by what had once been Union Station's main doors, now boarded, awaiting its rebirth as a civic museum. He'd come not as an officer this time, but as an old man paying his respects to the ghost that had educated him better than any academy ever. He carried a single folder and a thermos of coffee that smelled faintly of chicory, the same kind Ruby's diner had always brewed. The boards on the station groaned when he stepped inside. The place was empty except for sunlight spilling through the windows in slanted beams. Dust rose in lazy swirls. Glittering like broken time, he found locker 128, its metal skin now polished clean by the renovation crew. He crouched, placed the thick file inside, and added one more thing. A photocopy of Thomas Renshaw's confession, the edges trimmed neatly. Then, gently, the envelope with Eleanor's smiling photo dot. It felt strangely ceremonial. As though he was giving the past its proper resting place when he shut the locker door. The clang echoed around the vast room, then faded into silence. He stood there for a long moment, hat in hand, dot in all his years chasing crimes. Harris had learned that plenty of cases were solved through blood, sweat, and luck. But just a few resolved themselves only through understanding. This was one of those somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon jostled dust loose. Sunlight caught it midair, turning grime into temporary gold. He smiled softly and muttered, "There you go." Stories told. Outside, Main Street held its steady autumn rhythm. Trucks droned past, children pedaled home from school, and from somewhere downtown, the faint sound of a band practicing for the Veterans Day Parade drifted through the air. The brass instruments hit a familiar phrase, "God bless America," and Harris chuckled under his breath. "Still practicing after 40 years, he said. "Guess some things don't change." He climbed into his old Dodge pickup and drove. The bench seat creaked, fabric worn threadbare along the seams, but it was comfortable in the way only old things could be. The radio crackled before finding a steady signal. Asterisk Simon and Garfunkel's The Boxer. The song rolled out softly as the sun dipped behind the mesas. He drove the long way home, past the quiet lake road where the pines now cast long, solemn shadows. The newly fixed plaque at the turn read asterisk Briggs Point. A small bunch of flowers lay beneath it someone had remembered when Harris parked beside the lake for a moment. He turned off the engine and listened. No sound but water and wind. The surface rippled pink with sunset, and he thought about how thin the line was between accident and crime. Between pride and love, people always thought guilt belonged to the one who betrayed or harmed, but he knew better. Sometimes it belonged to those who saw the pain coming and looked away, keeping quiet, thinking it was mercy, when it was really cowardice in disguise. In his own life, he had done that too often, maybe. Missed birthdays, postponed promises, left words unsaid out of pride or fatigue. And each silence had its own echo across the years. He looked at the reflection of the fading sky across the hood of his truck. Feeling that peculiar ache nostalgia brings a simultaneous gratitude and loss, he murmured softly to the invisible pair whose story he had chased. "You two taught me something." Then, almost to himself, "Truth's patient, but not polite. It waits, then it arrives, whether you're ready or not." The wind lifted off the water and swept through the cabin, carrying the faint scent of pine and cold metal. He started the engine again, headlights catching the new memorial sign once more before turning back toward town. The drive was slow, measured. He passed old landmarks, the shuttered bowling alley, the library's neon sign flickering under moth wings, the very diner window where Marjorie still served pie to anyone curious enough about the old days. Inside, he could see her wiping a counter. Humming along to something on the jukebox, he gave a small wave without stopping as he reached his street. Porch lights blinked on one by one, like a string of fireflies along memory's edge. He turned into his driveway, the Dodge giving a long content sigh as he cut the ignition. The house awaited him, quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. He settled in his armchair, poured the last of his thermos coffee, and flicked on the living room lamp. On the turntable beside him spun a record asterisk John Denver's Back Home Again. The vinyl crackled. That lovely imperfection that always made the music warmer. Harris looked around the small, cluttered room framed black and white of him in uniform. A faded baseball cap from the 70s. A half-read Louis L'Amour novel by the lamp. It was a museum of his own life now. He took his pen and opened his notebook, the same one that had chronicled the case. On the final page, he wrote simply, "Greater than we don't lose the past. We inherit its lessons. Hold truth close. Forgive what you can. Tell the people you love today." He underlined it once and leaned back. Beyond the window, the night deepened in quiet grace. He felt neither sadness nor triumph, just a peace that sat somewhere between. Mark Harris switched off the lamp. A shaft of moonlight slid across the floor, touching the edge of his notebook. Outside, the wind whispered through the maples, stirring the world gently back to life. The locker, the letter, the confession. The ghost they could rest now. So could he. And with that, the detective closed his eyes to the steady hum of the night. The vinyl's soft static fading into silence. Time had carried a simple truth. Across 11 years of rust and dust, withholding truth to spare pain only multiplies it. Pride drowns faster than guilt. But honesty, though it stings, lets even tragedy finally breathe, for every choice hidden and every silence chosen. There comes a moment when the past asks kindly but firmly to be heard. And when it does, as Detective Harris learned, you answer, because truth, once found, is the gentlest form of peace.